First, we're going to talk about glaze thickness. This glaze is too thin. You can see all the details of the finger, you can see the skin through it. And this glaze is the proper thickness. You can't see the skin through, but you can see the details of your nail bed and also some of your wrinkles. And this glaze is too thick. You can see that it almost covers all the details of the finger. Knowing glaze thickness is really important because it helps you know how long you're going to dip your piece when you're using the big glaze buckets. You see here that first I mixed up the glaze and I'm checking the thickness of it to see how long I should keep the piece in there. So now I'm going to use the dipping tongs and dip my piece in. You'll notice that I keep it in around 8 seconds, but that's because the glaze was a little thin. On average, you're going to want to dip your piece around 6 seconds. After I've dipped, I'm going to shake off any of the extra glaze and then take it to your table in order to dry. This piece is now dry, so I'm going to check the thickness of the glaze using a needle tool. I scratch it first, take a look, and then I can use my finger to smooth it out. The glaze on your piece should be around 1.5 to 2 eggshells thick. So if you take a look at this picture, you can see the thickness of an egg and try to visualize it when you scratch your piece. And here are some examples of what will happen if your glaze is too thin, just right, and a little bit thick. It's definitely worse when it's too thin, so err on the side of caution and put more material if needed. Now I'm going to show you how to brush on glazes. Here I have the glazes that I'm going to use in the small containers out in front of me. Now, when you brush on glaze, you still want to make sure that you're brushing on the right thickness. So in order to do this, you should use the following technique. When brushing, try to dab on the glaze rather than brush long strokes. You might notice that you're going to have to grab a lot of material while you do this because the clay underneath soaks up the glaze really fast. Here and fast forward, I'm just going and I'm covering the whole piece in small dabbing and small brush strokes. I go in and also clean up the edges and use my needle tool to scratch off any extra glaze. After I got that, now I'm going to get more of my glaze and do the details. Use the same technique as you did with the hair, but probably use a smaller brush just so it's a little bit more careful and easier to do. So now I'm going to fast forward a little bit so you can just see how I go through all the different details and use the same technique with a small brush. Okay, so now I'm going to slow down and show you what to do if you've made a mistake. What you can do is just use the needle tool and scratch the glaze off where you don't want it anymore. You can also take a damp sponge and remove the excess as well. Now remember, you want to clean off the bottom of your piece wherever it's going to stick or stand onto the kiln shelf. So here I'm using a damp sponge and I'm just wiping off the bottom of the piece to remove the glaze where it's going to sit. So I put it on the table just to make sure and continue with my glazing process. Alright, so I've gotten all of the areas that I wanted glazed and there's the finished product. Now I wanted to remind you once again to always scratch your glaze after you brush or dip to make sure it's the right thickness.